Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. The first major sit-down interview in some time for Anthony Joshua. It certainly has got tongues racing and people quoting Joshua, and the whole bow down to me once I beat Andy Ruiz Jr. has certainly been a talking point all across the internet. I've seen a number of people discussing this, and this sit-down interview, which no doubt will be the first of many, and there's also one with Andy Ruiz Jr. that's been released by Sky Sports. Expect to see more of them from this point on. We're just over 2 weeks out from the fight at the time this video was published. The promotion is ramping up into the final phase. Really, the push will be on now by Sky Sports and all concerned to really push this event now, grow it into a massive pay-per-view event, and a sort of interview from Joshua, which a number of interesting elements is certainly going to help. And the whole bow down to me comment, which we'll get to, it's quite interesting because when I heard it or saw it on different things on Facebook or Instagram, different people talking about it, I sort of thought, has he taken too many punches to the head, because it sounded a little out of character. But hearing some of the context behind it, I sort of thought, oh yeah, well, when you put it in the context in which it was said with the other stuff around it, it didn't sound nearly as diluted, I guess. I don't know, but we'll get to that soon. But what we'll start off with is training camp, because obviously what we've seen in recent weeks, and Anthony Joshua and Andy Ruiz Jr. training hard. They've had a 12-week camp for this. And Joshua says the energy in camp's been positive, a lot of hard work, and we've seen a lot of sparring partners coming in and out of Anthony Joshua's training camp, 8 at least I can think of off the top of my head. And he said it has been, with all the sparring and the sparring partners, the biggest change in his preparations for this camp. There's been more sparring, they've been giving him hell, and he said it's the closest way to get to a fight. It gets you battle hardened, it gets you battle ready, and he said any sparring partner is doing you a favor by throwing punches at you, there to replicate Ruiz's style, and that they're there to bring the heat. And he said he's been taking punches to the head, shoulders, forearms. He said it just gets you conditioned so you can walk through fire. And I know after that loss to Andy Ruiz Jr., certainly fans had been raking over the coals about, what could be done differently in the build-up to a second fight. And I know that we all knew that there was a condensed build-up period of 5 or 6 weeks ahead of the first fight. But one of the major talking points heading into the fight, or especially after it, was the talk of sparring and late sparring that Joshua had, and the rumors about him getting knocked out by Joey DeWeco a week or two out from the fight. Obviously, he's been having a lot of sparring, a lot of rounds. He says he's been taking a lot of punches and trying to get battle hardened. And I know that might seem a little bit counterintuitive to some of, what had been around regarding the other previous sparring stories. And I know that there will be some jokers who will say, how many times has he been knocked out in this camp, etc. But Joshua clearly has identified with his team they needed more sparring, a volume of sparring more than they have had before, because they obviously felt he was underdone heading into the first fight. And whether his sparring partners can actually replicate Andy Ruiz Jr., it's an open question. He's had a lot of sparring partners, but there's only 1 or 2 that I sort of think are really more of a sort of match for Ruiz Jr.'s type of pressure, his fast hands, that style of fighting. Others that have been in camp have felt like an odd fit, but the proof will be in the pudding on fight night. But he said he hopes his tools can be sharpened, he hopes it will pay off, and he said hopefully by the time of the fight, it will be the best version of himself. Another main talking point for this fight has been, was Joshua's weight, what would it be? Would he come back down? Because he was 247 for the first fight. He's generally fought quite well around 242, 243. The Parker fight, the Brazil fight, decent weight for him. But who knows, maybe he's a little bit lower than that. Maybe right now he's around 240. But we could well see as he plateaus in the week or so, as he sort of tapers, that he may actually put on a few pounds. He's done that before. They put on about 10 pounds ahead of the Carlos Takam fight, where he was 254 pounds. But on weight, he said, whatever weight you are, you work around that. So all I've done is focus on my boxing aspect. Provided I'm doing my training, doing my rounds, I'm feeling good, then the weight will be what the weight is. We just have to take the answers from the gym in order for the weight to be what it is. It's not like I've got to hit this target and that means I'm ready. So I actually think that he probably will come in somewhere around the low 240s. Maybe he's a little less than that right now. It's a little hard to tell because different photos and videos that have emerged, you can sort of take a stab in the dark at it, but sometimes it hasn't really sort of led to a weight on the scale ahead of the fight that gels with perception. I know for, a couple of recent fights, people have thought Joshua was weighing a little bit less than he ultimately weighed, but we shall see. But he definitely is cutting a bit of a trimmer figure right now. And one of the main differences that I've sort of noted in the build-up to this fight is how low-profile Joshua has been. But I guess when you've lost your belts, the expectation isn't necessarily all going to be on you to push the fight, promote the fight. There's a lot of pressure, and there'll be a lot of expectations on Andy Ruiz Jr. to do his part to help this fight and do his piece of media and other, sort of event type things that will be expected of him. And previously, Joshua has been heavily relied on to do that sort of side of things, and a lot of his opponents have really had a lighter workload. But it feels like there has been more that's been pushed onto Ruiz because he is the champion after all, and maybe Joshua with his team have actually actively stepped back a little bit from the sounds of it to not take as much on their shoulders, to try get in camp, focus a bit more. And he said, after taking my loss, I got to get back to my fundamentals. There's a little crack in the foundation, so rather than sitting on the top of the kingdom, I've got to get down on my knees and get filling the cracks in and stuff like that. So rather than flaunting and promoting the show and showing off the castle. And I guess to some extent that doesn't quite gel with the whole Ruiz Jr. got lucky and threw a punch from the gods, and that what Joshua has previously put the first loss down to, describing it as a lucky punch. That statement that I just read out that Joshua said, effectively, he's, taking on that things weren't quite right for the first fight. There were tweaks that they needed to make, things that they needed to fix ahead of a second fight, and obviously taking a lower profile. And they've been looking at his weight and doing more sparring. These are all things that have been contributing to a slightly revised sort of plan of attack heading into this fight in terms of their camp preparations and what they're looking to do on fight night. And he was asked, well, on a loss, how do you feel about that? And effectively, he said he feels no stress. He feels like history shows how to deal with certain aspects of life, and he said, I'm just blessed to have a second opportunity. And on having added people in camp, because remember there's Angel Fernandez in camp, he's brought in some people for this camp to assist the camp, not necessarily take over training duties from Rob McCracken, etc. But he said, it's the ones who didn't reach out that are here now. I sought them out, and he was the one that thought they could add value to his camp. Ultimately, we'll see what the added preparations and the different sort of voices that he's been getting for this camp, whether that's going to pay dividends. Because it's easy to sort of say you're doing all these things different, but will it have a difference on fight night? And on his mentality of facing Ruiz Jr., has it changed because Ruiz Jr. is now the champ, whereas previously the interviewer sort of said, he was a guy that wasn't largely known and you weren't expected to have any trouble with him. So Joshua said, and this is where the controversial sort of comments that have grabbed headlines and really sort of taken people in, swept people away, said, I'm going to whoop him. Show him how great I am, because they think that he's that great. So when I beat him, I want everybody to bow down to my feet and tell me how great I am. I couldn't beat Andy Ruiz Jr. before and get the credit I deserve. And in the context of that full statement with that last line about previously he wouldn't have got credit for beating Andy Ruiz Jr., he's completely right. And obviously he's feeling a certain type of way because that comment, he wants people to bow down to him when he beats them, tell him how great he is. He's feeling that Andy Ruiz Jr. is probably getting maybe too much credit now, and that if he'd have beaten him, he would have got next to none. And I can see his point of view there in the context of what he's saying, that it was a no-win situation. He wouldn't have got credit, but actually now, because people do rate Ruiz Jr. a lot higher, he's got 3 belts, one of the biggest upsets in heavyweight boxing history. Maybe the irony will actually be Anthony Joshua will get the credit he deserves if he beats Andy Ruiz Jr. And he was asked of those statements about the whole bowing down to my feet and tell me how great I am if he wins. how does that gel with the whole stay humble demeanor? And I must admit, when I saw the headline before having any other context, I sort of thought, not exactly stay humble. And as I mentioned earlier, I wondered, is Joshua right in the head? Had he taken too many punches to the head in the first fight? But his take on it was that we need to take competition out of being humble. When you talk about competition, I feel people understand and respect that you have to carry a sense of fire in your belly, and that's all that is. It's not like arrogance or anything. It's just confidence. I'm just confident that I know what I have to do now, prepared to the best of my capabilities to go out and perform, and performance leads to the win. And to an extent, I agree with that, but I also think part of it is he's trying to dial himself in here mentally. And he still probably thinks it's humble, even though it sounds a bit diluted, the statement about bow down to my feet, tell me how great I am. I think many people just think it sounds a little bit ludicrous. I'm sure some people will love it. They'll love the mindset. But I think Joshua, in the context of his training camp and his belief for this fight to win this rematch, remember, a lot of fighters will tell themselves all manner of things to get themselves up for a fight. And I think that this is just part of that psychology, that he's really just trying to dial himself in mentally. He believes in his preparations. He believes in the game plan. He believes in what he's doing. And he believes he will perform. And as he says, performance leads to the win. So it might sound a little bit cringy on the surface, but you also have to sort of throw in there, this was the sort of main headline from the interview. He could have well said it, knowing it's going to generate headlines and interest for the upcoming rematch. After all, these sorts of interviews, this close to the fight, it's a promotional tool as well. And he was asked about Deontay Wilder, and he said, look, I'm not worried about Wilder. And even after, he said, I'm not going to entertain that conversation. And as we know, Wilder, if he gets past Luis Ortiz, he has to face Tyson Fury anyway. That is his plan, to go Ortiz, Fury, and then potentially the winner of Joshua Ruiz. We shall see, but it was an interesting interview, and we have not seen much of Anthony Joshua lately, and good insight into his camp. I think a lot of the things that we've discussed in this video, maybe we've touched on to some extent, but it was good to have a little bit more detail from the man himself about how preparations are going. What did you make of it? Drop a comment, loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.